Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. So we are still in our series on prisons, and today we're talking about water. We're talking about the water that prisoners are drinking inside of prisons. Now, if you know me at all, then you know that water is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I did my PhD in water and wastewater treatment. I'm all about making sure we all have high quality, drinkable water. That's the reason I even got into this whole world of environmental justice. So much lead poisoning, so much lead contamination, arsenic, so many water contaminants that are affecting our communities. I wanted to jump right in and figure out how I could be a part of addressing those issues. And so I believe that every person, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you are, has a right to clean drinking water, because you can't live without it. It is probably the one thing you can't live without. And I mean, you might think, oh, I can't live without my phone, or I can't live without the internet, or I can't live without certain items that you enjoy using that may add value to your life. But I promise you that you cannot live without water. You literally cannot live. If you look online, if you do the research, you can go a few weeks without food, but you can only go about 3 days without water, or it becomes a problem. And so it is important that we all have clean drinking water available to us whenever we need it. That is so important. It's just that simple. And yet, there are prisons all around the world where people who are incarcerated do not have access to clean drinking water, to drink, to bathe in, to do normal activities, things like laundry, whatever you need to do with water, hygiene. And so on the podcast, we talk a lot about water quality in underserved environmental justice communities. We talk about failing infrastructure and how large cities, urban areas are seeing water quality diminish because of the lack of quality infrastructure and policies. We talk about all those kinds of things. And yet the same thing is happening in prisons all over America and all over the world. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Let's talk about water. Stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. Thank you for listening. So on this episode, we're talking about water in prisons because we have a serious problem. The water in prisons is just awful, right? There's tons of stories, tons of reports, tons of news articles all over the country about discolored water in prison, water that smells awful, that irritates your skin, that tastes like metal and awful water all across the country in prisons. And it's a really, really big problem. Here's a few examples I found, just a quick search. It won't take long for you to read and learn about all the issues associated with water in prisons. So here's a few. In the state prisons in New York, the people who are in them talk about the water tasting like metal. They talk about how the water is so discolored that when they wash their clothes with it, it changes the color of their clothes. There's interviews, there's reports about correctional officers and staff who refuse to drink the water in the prisons. They tell the prisoners, hey, you shouldn't even be drinking that. That's really not good for you, but they don't have a choice. We'll talk about that later. They have no choice in what they drink. And so they're forced to use it. One prisoner called it water roulette. He's saying that every day you wake up, you don't know what you're going to get. And you don't know how you're going to feel when you're done drinking it. That's how bad the water is in a lot of these state prisons in New York City. Well, in New York State. And another report talked about facilities in Illinois where the prisoners talk about having to drink water that's completely brown with particles floating in it. They said it smells like fish. Sometimes it smells like sewage. And look, it could have actually been sewage. Who knows? Because we don't know how they're managing the water over there. But the issue is they're drinking that and they're using that. in the prisons in Illinois. In California, there have been reports of high levels of arsenic in the drinking water in prisons because arsenic occurs naturally in the ground. And so when you pull up groundwater or when you start using that water for drinking purposes, you have to remove it. But they must not have the proper treatment systems for the prisons to remove it. And so they're finding it in the drinking water in those prisons. And that happens a lot because if you have very particular contamination that requires a very specific way of removing it, if the prison system doesn't invest in that technology, it just won't get removed. And it'll just be what it is. And the prisoners will be drinking it and getting sick and dealing with the impacts with no option, with no way of addressing it, because it's on the correctional facility to provide the right treatment and the right quality of water for people to drink. And there's many more examples, many more reports, many more articles. You can go on and on about this. And obviously you could be listening to this and saying, well, of course I could look up examples of bad water quality anywhere, right? I mean, it's not like every single city has perfect water all the time. So the fact that prisons have instances of poor water quality, what does that matter? I mean, why are you even talking about it? I don't get it. And it could be a valid point of discussion, right? Because we've been talking a lot about water infrastructure across the country, across the world, needing to improve. And clearly prisons are no different. But there are a couple of unique challenges that prisoners face when it comes to their drinking water and their quality of life while they're being incarcerated. And the first is simply this: they don't get to choose, right? They don't get to decide what water they get to drink. They can't just go to the store and buy some bottled water when the water in the prison is undrinkable. They have to use it. They have to use it whenever it's available with whatever quality comes out of those faucets. Us on the outside, I mean, when they say there's a water advisory or a boil water notice, the water is not drinkable, we can go to the store, buy a few cases of bottled water, and drink it until they fix the problem, which they will fix because we expect them to fix the problem if we can't drink the water coming out of the faucets in our homes and in our apartments and at our schools, or need to provide water that we can drink. That's our expectation. But if you're in prison, you don't get that same level of service. There is no expectation that it'll get any better. You're just forced to use it. And think about how you use water. It's not simply just drinking. Okay, maybe you can avoid drinking water. You might drink some soda or some juice or something else if they offer it instead of water. That's fine. Assuming you're not making that beverage with the water from the prison, okay, you might be okay with drinking it. But we're not just drinking the water, right? We're cooking with it. We're showering with it. We're doing our laundry with it. We're washing our hands and our face and keeping ourselves clean with it. And so if you're forced to use dirty water for all those different things, at some point it's going to have an impact on you. It's going to affect you in some way. You're going to increase your risk of serious illness, complications, problems. Everything's going to be a problem for you because the water isn't safe to consume in any capacity. And if you're in prison, you don't get a choice. You either have to use that water or not have it and be unsanitary as you live among hundreds of other people who are using that same water. So that's the first thing. You don't get to choose at all if you're in prison. The second thing is we don't know how bad the problem actually is. So when you live out here, outside of prison, they have consumer confidence reports that tell you the quality of the water. They tell you if there's any violations. The EPA requires you to report your system's violations and issues to them for public record. You know, we can look around and see what's going on. And if there's a problem, we can talk to our water department, to our city officials, to the mayor, and say, look, the water is not drinkable. We can't continue to deal with this. And even in EJ communities where it's a consistent problem, I'm still reading about it. People are still able to go in and research it. People are still made aware of the scope of the issue and how big of a problem it is. And so we have that benefit outside of prison. But if you're inside of prison, if you're inside, you don't know how bad it actually is or how pervasive the problem extends. So those of us talking about it now, we don't know if our local prisons and jails have good or bad water quality. There's no information about that. I don't know where to find it. I couldn't find it. I looked up my state. I'm here in South Carolina just to see what I could find out about the water quality in the prisons around here. I couldn't find anything. I don't even know how the stories get out. I'm glad some people are reporting it and we're actually seeing some of these concerns lifted, because ultimately you're in there isolated and there's no way to get the information out as to what the quality of the water is where you are. So people like researchers and advocates, public officials even, who are made aware of these issues in the prisons, I would imagine this would galvanize them and move them to action to learn more and to understand more and to ensure that people who are in these prisons are at least not getting sick and dying from the water, especially if we've seen these stories in other places. But it's just not happening. I don't see it happening. You know, if it was anybody else, any other group, we would know. If it was a university, if it was a apartment complex, a nice subdivision, we'd be well aware of the water issues that were there. I mean, I get notifications on Google all the time about water mains breaking, about boil water notices, about E. coli contamination in different parts of the cities and different parts of the state. And we all are aware of it. I haven't seen anything about any issues in any prisons unless I really look hard and search for certain articles and certain advocacy groups that are thinking and talking about it. And so I was thinking, why is that? Why is it that we don't know how bad this problem is? And I got a couple of reasons. Tell me what you think about these reasons. The first thing I thought about was, well, no one really cares about people in prison, right? That's why we're having this whole series to begin with, because we don't care. We don't think about them. We don't consider what their lives are like. We don't even stop to ask ourselves if their environment, what they're having to deal with, is even humane. Like, we don't even think about it. We believe that they did their crimes, they got their sentence, and they're where they deserve to be. And you know what? Having bad water, that's just part of the deal, because you shouldn't have committed those crimes anyway. I mean, obviously, everybody who's in jail didn't commit those crimes. There's a lot of injustice in the system, but that's the thinking. You don't get to have the quality of life that we have here on the outside. You don't get to have clean water. You don't get to have clean air. You don't get to have these kind of basic environmental protections that the rest of us who didn't commit those crimes get to enjoy. That seems to be a lot of the thinking. And the second thing I was thinking about was, well, maybe people do care and people are asking the questions, but the prison officials, the Department of Corrections in these different places, they're not willing to allow the information to get out, right? Maybe they're not allowing people to test the water, to ask prisoners what it's like, to ask them if they drink the water, to ask them how they feel about the situation there. Maybe that's what's happening. And so maybe people are pulling up and they're saying, hey, we want to take a look and understand what's happening in your prison. And the person says, no, you can't come back here. Stay away. Everything is fine. Nothing to see here. And they drive out the people who actually care about what's happening. And if that's the case, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. If you were running a facility and everything was awful, the water was awful, it's hard to breathe, the conditions are not suitable even for animals to live in, you wouldn't want somebody to see that or to report on it or to talk about it or to ask about it. I can imagine that. It would be really embarrassing for you. to be running a facility that's like that. For me to walk in, turn the faucet on, and see different color water coming out, and then to ask you about it. Who's in charge, whose responsibility it is to ensure that these prisoners, that these people who are incarcerated are not being unduly harmed by the life that they're living while they're behind bars. It's a bad look. It is a bad look. So I get it. You wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want that to be something on your record, on your watch, so to speak. And so, okay. Either way, we still have a problem. Either way, we know that there are issues with water in prisons, and we know that because of the nature of prisons in general, the fact that they're isolated, that they're remote, that people are not made aware of what's going on with what's happening in prisons, that all of those things feed into the great possibility that more and more prisons across the country, across the world, are dealing with these same exact issues, and we just don't know about it. We need to know about these things. We need people to go in and find out what's happening in these prisons. And, and just an aside, if you are a prisoner, right? If you're listening to this and you know that the water that you're drinking, that you're exposed to, is not the quality it should be. It smells funny. It tastes strange. It breaks your skin out. It discolors your clothes. Everything you taste with the water is just strange. You're cooking with it and you can't seem to get the taste out. You can't seem to really deal with what you're drinking. Because let's not forget, water is a human right. It's a universal right. The United Nations expects that every person has access to clean drinking water. It can't be denied by anyone to anyone. And so if you're dealing with that, you can actually sue the officials if you have representation, whoever your lawyer is, whoever you've been working with on your cases. You can sue the Department of Corrections, the people in charge of your particular facility, for action to make sure that your water is clean. People have done that. People have been able to sue and get changes to the way that their water is treated and delivered to people in prison. Now, I will say this. A lot of people have tried to use the cruel and unusual punishment route, right? The idea that you drinking this water, you being exposed to this kind of water, is cruel and unusual punishment for your time in prison. And it makes sense because it is. It is a cruel way to treat people who are behind bars, to force them to drink that type of water and to consume it daily throughout their prison sentence. But if you read the legal arguments, the legal reviews, you'll see that that particular line of questioning and that line of attack is very difficult, because it's hard to prove that someone is deliberately forcing you to drink contaminated water as part of a punishment for your crime or for your, actions in the prison. It's too hard to prove. Nobody's going to admit that that's what they're actually doing. They're going to just tell you that that's the water they receive, and you're just being given whatever's being sent to you. And that's all they have to say to avoid responsibility in that arena. And it might be true that they're not actually contaminating the water that you're drinking. They're just indifferent to the quality of the water that you're drinking, and they're not concerned at all about what you're receiving, but they're not deliberately creating those conditions. You could argue that that's not the case, and you'd probably be right, but in the courtroom, they won't go for it. So what you need to do if you're going to sue, if you're going to push against this kind of water quality issue, is to talk about the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, all of these laws that guarantee every citizen the right and access to clean drinking water. And it has a list of regulations that talk about the acceptable standards of what water should be if it were to be consumed by an individual. That's the way you go about it, because every state, because of the EPA's laws and regulations and standards, they have to meet those standards. There's standards for contamination, for color, for all types of contaminants that you might experience in a water source. You are protected under law from drinking and consuming those. And so use that argument. That's the stronger one. That's the one where they have to prove that they're doing everything they can to ensure that they're meeting these guidelines and requirements for safe drinking water. And I promise you, if you're drinking water that tastes strange and looks funny, they're not meeting it. They have to come in and test, come in and treat, and they have to come in and ensure that that water quality is what it should be, and that the people who are drinking it are not being harmed by the quality of that water. That is the way I think you can really make some progress on addressing water issues if you are in prison trying to survive from day to day. That is what you have to do. The Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, all of these acts, all these departments of, environmental quality, environmental control, environmental health, these departments are required to ensure that the water that's given to anybody in their jurisdiction is safe to drink. They are required to do that, especially if you're being served by a public or a community water system. Those water systems have to report their water quality to the EPA and ensure that it's safe to drink. And if you have a situation where you're experiencing unsafe drinking water, you can absolutely challenge them on that. And they need to make some changes and make some adjustments to ensure that that water is safe for you to drink. That's on them, and that's on anybody anywhere who provides water for people to drink, no matter who they are, no matter where they are. So if you're in the big ritzy community, big houses, if you're at an apartment complex, if you're at a school, if you're in a prison, if you're in a detention center, if you're anywhere and they are providing you water to drink, it needs to be clean and safe. Period. No questions asked. If it's not, then it needs to be. That's what they have to do. If you're listening to this and you're in prison and that's what you feel like is happening, call your lawyer, get some representation, and push for a case against the Department of Corrections that challenges their adherence to the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's what you do. Now, what about the rest of us? Those of us just sitting around listening to this while we're going for a walk or doing our laundry or washing dishes or just laying and relaxing. How can we help at all? What can we do? So if you're a researcher at all, if you do any kind of water research, any kind of environmental justice research, any kind of public health research, or if you just care about people and how they're living, let me just tell you, we need more research in this area. We need more people. We need more minds and more resources given towards understanding and confronting what's happening in prisons all around the country and all around the world. Right? There's too many unanswered questions that we have to get to the bottom of. Right? So if you think about prisons, for instance, how old is the infrastructure that delivers water to prisons? That's a question that we need to ask. I mean, we don't really know much about that. The water piping, the pumping, all those things we don't know about. Right? Where do prisons get their water from? Where does it come from? Is it coming from an underground well and there's no treatment system to make sure nothing's in it? Is it coming from a public system that's really, really far away, and so by the time it gets to the prison, the quality is really bad? What is happening? Where is this water coming from? Right? How are complaints handled about water quality? So when a prisoner says, hey, sir, hey, ma'am, this water tastes strange. What happens? Does anybody send that report to the necessary people to get that addressed? Are they just told to keep drinking it? Don't worry about it? Are they told to just sit down and be quiet? Like, I don't know what happens. But these are some of the questions we need research on. We need to understand, because these are the things that can help us move in the direction of providing clean water to people in prison, and not just having the status quo be what it is and continuing to have what we continue to have, because we don't want that. We want things to be different and things to change. And I've said it before, data drives decisions. Data drives decisions. So when you have information and you have tangible, real, quantitative measurements and data, you can then start to make real, substantive changes, because the data is what drives the decision, not people's feelings, not people's thoughts or people's ideas, but real information. So research is critical to these kind of things, critical to these types of situations. And along with that, we need advocates, right? We need activists. I know you're out there. I know you've been pushing for prison abolition. You've been pushing for things to be done differently in prisons, for people to get better resources and access to things like education, healthcare, all those issues that are in prisons that we know are problems. Here's another problem. Here's another one. Because many prisons and many prisoners are dealing with dirty, contaminated, harmful water. And it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter how you think about the people in prisons or what you think about them. No one should be forced to drink that type of water. No one deserves to be in a situation where that's all that's available to them, is the worst kind of water that you can find. Right? They're still people, and they should still be protected from environmental harms and environmental hazards, no matter what they are. And in this case, we're talking about water. They should not have to be dealing with these water issues constantly for weeks and months and years. That is not how it should go. Because ultimately, we all should care. That's what it comes down to. We need to care about the incarcerated. We need to care about people who are in prison. Because no matter what you think about them, they're still people, and we should care about them. We should care about their well-being. We should care about what they're consuming. We should care about how they're being treated. Because at some point, if we're doing our jobs correctly as correctional facilities and as rehabilitation facilities, the idea is that they're going to be released at some point, and they're going to be among us. And so we need them to be healthy. We need them to be helped before that happens. And so we need to care about them and their well-being. Right? We need to care enough to demand that the people in charge ensure that the water that they're drinking doesn't make them sick. It doesn't injure them, doesn't kill them. We can do that. We can all do that. We can raise concerns. We can demand more from these officials, because ultimately, the people are the ones who advocate and who push for change. And because people in prison aren't accessible and aren't able to get the word out, those of us who are out here listening and who care and who are concerned need to be the ones pushing the issues forward and advocating on their behalf. And that's something that all of us can do. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, think about your view of people in prison. Make sure you understand that they are people just like you, just like me, just like us. We don't like dirty water. We don't like drinking contaminated water. We don't think it's safe and healthy to do so. And they shouldn't be drinking it either. And we can just say that out loud over and over again. People in prison should not be forced to drink this type of water. ever. We can say that, and it's not controversial to say it because there are people just like us. You should not have to drink that type of water ever. And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.